I'm Jeff Nyquist, and this is another edition of Friends and Enemies. We've been gone for 2 weeks. I've been traveling, and so has my co host, Alex Benesch. He's in Germany. I'm in the United States. And I'm going to talk about my trip to Milwaukee to the World War III conference and to Toronto, where I participated in the strategic conference on the Arctic and got a chance to meet General Van Herk, former commander of NORAD and NORTHCOM, talking about the vulnerability of North America. And so, Alex, you went to the south of France, I believe. Is that right?
That is correct. And that may sound very romantic, but if you actually want to see something, it's hard work actually. So it's like you can go there and have a decent place and get drunk all day and go swimming in the ocean, or maybe rent a boat or something like that, or hang out at the pool and just relax. That's of course something you can do. But we wanted to see something. We wanted to see all these different cities and places. And of course, I was expecting wealth. I was expecting to see some outrageous wealth over there. What I didn't expect was the contrast of it, because in these bigger cities like Cannes or Antibes or Nizza and so on, you can see so many people and so many different people, average folks, all walks of life, and almost all of them are fairly normal, right? So they got these tiny little apartments overlooking the ocean. They're still paying significant rent, I think, and a number of those people, they have these tiny little boats in the harbor and next to some bigger boats, and there's some bigger boats and even bigger boats, and then you get the super yachts, which you can always see lurking in the background. And you can also see the super properties. And when you walk by real estate, one of the real estate offices, you get you get the information in the window, and you can look at those properties, and they're 10 million, 15 million, 20 million, $25 million. So we walked past quite some super properties. I think one of them, that's what my wife told me, one of them used to be owned, I think, by Roman Abramovich, the oligarch, Russian, let's say Russian oligarch. A bit of a complex background there. I think he no longer has it, and it was remarkably beautiful. I mean, there are only a handful, I think, a handful of properties like this in the entire world, and it looks nice. It certainly is situated in a perfect spot, but it must be still somewhat terrifying to be in a position like this. I mean, there were other oligarchs that were arrested, obviously, for various reasons. And there were so many others who were tossed out of windows or poisoned with tea or something else because they misbehaved, because they thought, well, couldn't we have a better arrangement with the West? Couldn't we scale down operations? Couldn't we get out of Ukraine? Couldn't we just bring the good times back where we just make money and our children have money and they drive around in their sports cars in France or in Britain? And everything is nice, but some of these people, for various reasons, they were taken out. And also, when you live in these super properties, you can never be sure what's going on in them. So they're probably all bugged. I mean, I would assume they're bugged, and you can bug a place so you can never get rid of the bugs. That happened to certain embassy buildings. I think an American embassy building, I think more than once had to be taken down because the bugs, the listening devices were embedded so deeply. And also, in connection with this exploding pagers story, which we're going to talk about in a bit, there's so many ways of booby trapping a place. Chemical booby trapping, biological booby trapping. So this is why some of these oligarchs are so terrified, and especially Vladimir Putin is so terrified. Everything has to be triple checked. His bed sheets, his carpets, his underwear, his clothing, his food, everything could be potentially contaminated. And so this is one of the major impression that I got when I was in the south of France. And also, it made me wonder, what does it take to corrupt somebody? Or what is important to me? What would be nice to me? And I was walking around this one place with my daughter, And I was thinking, well, I'd rather be healthy. I'd rather be healthy. I want to I like a few watches. There's a few watch models that I like. I mean, I would like to have a let's say a Rolex Daytona because it's so pretty. But one or two watches like this, and that would be it for me. I don't need an AP. I don't need something super fancy, and I certainly don't need 10 watches. And also, I'd like to have more space for my work. I'm happy with a large SUV, and I really value the people I work with and other people I surround myself with. So anything beyond that is not that interesting to me. So if somebody was to offer me money and say you can live in a nice place, you can have status symbols, you can have this, that, and the other, that wouldn't be interesting to me. I mean, I value some things, but I'm not that interested in other things. And I'm from the normal class, so but I still am not obsessed with impressing all these other people from the regular folks, with status symbols and have, this watch and that car and certain properties. But it really made me think, because what about other people? How easy would it be to corrupt other people? And we saw a lot of cases in the last couple of years, Germany, France, US, everywhere, cases of people taking Russian money, taking Chinese money, just to live a bit nicer. Just to get that nicer position, just to have less work and a bit more money and a bit more status, to get a bit more status and impress a few more people. Some people are bought fairly easily, right? So some people can be bought fairly easily, and we saw that so many times. And when it comes to you, for example, I mean, there's people posting old clips of you on the internet, clips from decades ago where you said what was going to happen, and there was so many opportunities for someone, or so many people thought, well, maybe we can buy Jeff, maybe we can get him a fancy position, maybe we can get him some fancier lifestyle. But still, you called it decades ago, and these people didn't buy you, but they were able to buy many other people. Why is that?
Well, I think there's two things. People, they get tempted and they don't really, when you are engaged in trying to analyze things and to understand enemies, friends and enemies, your enemies are noticing, and you yourself are not 100% sure about everything you're saying because you're trying to figure it out and nobody knows. There's just so many things to know and so many ways to go wrong. And for example, in my case, a guy named Boris one day calls me up, and he'd been sending me notes, emails about how he loved my work and how wonderful my essays were. And he then says, how would you like to come to St. Petersburg and Moscow and be a guest speaker
Um,
in St. Petersburg and Moscow? And we will take you to these great restaurants, and you'll have the time of your life, and you'll meet important people. And I'm a friend of Vladimir Putin's.
mm-hmm.
And this is, more than 10 years ago. And I was like dumbfounded. You're at first you're flattered when you hear this, right? And you think, oh my gosh, but then it has to sink in who you're talking to. And of course, I did not attend. He did not approach me again after I turned it down. But you have other people approaching you, other Russians, people from various corners. What would you like to work for these people as an advisor? Come to Europe, and then you find out that all of these things are just to derail you, to get you to write. I had when I wrote for one organization, and they said, we don't want you to write about, well, actually two different organizations that I was being paid by. They said, we don't want you to write about Russia anymore or
Yeah.
communism. Here, become an economic expert, write about something else, and we'll keep paying you. But if I was going to continue this work, I wasn't going to be paid.
Yeah.
And because, and you know, there was a broadcaster the one who took Art Bell's place at first, and he said he was told not to talk about communism, and he did, and they X'd him out. And he said I was keeping up Art Bell's numbers. Art Bell was a very famous talk radio host. He was the number two in terms of audience size in the USA, which is millions of people listening. So it is the fix is on. And I saw this in graduate school. I could have had a great career if I had just stayed away from anti-communism or
Yeah, do something
warning people
boring.
about. Yeah,
Boring pays.
it is. Well, it's less boring. It's less meaningful to do something that everyone else is doing because they're being paid to shut up and follow a line. When you realize this is the road to destruction, that this is destroying society, that you have to stand up against it. And a lot of people, when I talk, they don't realize what I'm standing up against. I'm standing up against almost everything.
Yeah,
They don't
exactly.
understand that almost everybody's sold out in one degree or another. Now, a lot of people will be offended when I say that, but there's a lot of people that just don't understand why they've been promoted. They've been promoted because they don't get it, and that's their main qualification. Maybe the U.S. Speaker of the House, right? Why did he get promoted? I heard somebody at the conference on the Arctic say, well, he doesn't really know what's going on
Mm.
security wise. He's sort of naive about the Russians and the Chinese. He doesn't understand. There was a guy I know who he used to debrief. He used to give briefings to congressmen, and I remember I was with him socially, and he met another person who gave briefings to congressmen. He said, is it just me, or are these people completely uneducated and don't, it's like
Yeah.
you have to start in kindergarten with them. They just don't understand a thing. And the guy said, yeah, there's a few that know, but most of them, their level of knowledge and general knowledge and education makes it very difficult to explain complex security issues to them,
Yeah.
you
Yeah, and it's
know?
like there's sometimes you hear people speak in a major at a major television network, right? So they have some kind of title, they're part of some think tank or whatever, and they explain something about a security issue, and it's very very oversimplified because it's for television, and that's what he's been told to do, because they're saying the audience is extremely uneducated. Keep it simple, keep it very simple, just toss out these sound bites, right? So then they do that, and sometimes there's a talking there's several talking heads, and they're exchanging some of these baseline ideas, and it's all very very primitive. And so the audience at some point thinks, well, this is what an expert sounds like, and if you just repeat some of these sound bites, you sound educated as well. But
Yes,
in reality, nobody in the audience would do this in a different with a different field. If you
the
watch a
people can't, yeah, people
if you
can't
watch
tell the
chemists, as
difference.
if you
Yeah.
watch 5 6 chemists, very experienced chemists talk about some very complicated, or talk about some issues, people in the audience wouldn't assume they themselves are capable in chemistry just because they were listening to these guys. But when it comes to security matters, it's the impression that everybody can talk like an expert, and they just have to know a few gimmicks,
Right.
and that's good enough. But it's not.
Well, I remember years ago. I mean, I resigned from WorldNet Daily. This is more than 20 years ago, and I was writing for Financial Sense Online, and I had to work for a living. I was a security contractor, so I had to work. I couldn't get, I made some money from book sales, but it was very small. Authors don't make much money unless they're on TV and they become a bestseller, and it's usually TV personalities that sell a lot of books. But what they do to you, what it does to you, is that when people contradict you or they dismiss you publicly, and then you're not hired or you're not invited to the cocktail party, so to speak, people go from having, a lot of people don't have a lot of confidence to begin with. They go from having no confidence to having such severe doubt that they give up
Yeah,
and that they
yeah,
say, I better go along with these other people. I better, I don't want to be idiosyncratic. I don't want to be thought to be weird or offbeat or just plain goofy, right? And so that's what they try to put on you. And especially when there's economic pressure, right? I mean, we had the peace dividend at the end of the Cold War, and all these people want to make money trading in China or exploiting Russian raw materials. I had a guy in my church back in Eureka who was open business with somebody in Siberia, and I thought,
Hmm.
all I could say to him was, "You got to be really careful because they cheat. There's corruption there. You're not really protected doing business there. You always it's always these joint ventures where you have 49% with the American or
Yeah.
Western partners and 51% by the Russians, and they end up using that to leverage you out, and you lose everything. But if I open my mouth, if I said something, I find out nobody's calling me. They're not interested in talking to me anymore. So I found myself after a few years just writing for Financial Sense, not really being invited to interviews, not very rarely, sort of, in this position. And I thought, well, that's fine as long as they think things are going well, but I'm going to just stick to it, because of it. And but the problem is that and you doubt yourself. I thought, well, maybe I am just a crazy, stupid person who doesn't know much. And you don't. Who can say for sure that you're right all the time? Nobody can. So this is how they do it. They know human nature. They know our weakness, and they can squeeze you out through peer group pressure. And I was funny. In moving, I was going through my things. I found my old graduate record exam, and I was in the 93 percentile in the graduate record exam. And I thought, I didn't even remember that after all
Yeah.
these years. I thought, oh gosh, that must mean I'm pretty smart,
Yeah.
right? And I doubted myself. And the only time I really finally, I think it was 2016, thereabouts, 2017, when the news out of Russia and China was such that, and things I was hearing and so on, I thought, no, I don't have any doubts anymore. I have been, I could be right, wrong about all kinds of small details, but on this big picture thing,
Sure.
I've been right all this time. And
Now,
one of the reasons that I'm now invited to things like this conference in the Arctic and the World War III thing is that whereas I would have been thought too nutty to touch,
hmm,
they're going, well, he's been right.
exactly.
He's
So
been on it before we were.
people can
So
check
yeah,
out these old clips. I think it's on. I think I reposted it today on my timeline, my X or Twitter timeline, so you can watch a very fancy young Jeff, all fired up and basically saying what was going to happen. Now, of course, you heard about the Tenet story. If people haven't heard about it or they just don't quite remember what it was, now Tenet was this company that was offering very very nice contracts to influencers such as Tim Pool and this Ruben guy and some others. So Tenet was saying, we're gonna just pay you money on time, regular money. You just have to deliver a certain amount of videos on your usual topics, and if you hit that number of videos a week or a month, we're gonna pay you that much money a month. And very fancy money. And so these people said, yes, we're going to do that. That is going to give us planning security. We can hire people or more people, or we can have job guarantees, job safety for the people we already employed. We're not dependent on, the audience mood all the time. We don't have to be worried about our popularity every single day. We're just going to get a fixed amount of money. And so then the Department of Justice intervened and alleged that Tenet was funded by the Russia. Basically, this was supposed to be the old RT money. So if people remember the Russia Today television network, and so when that was banned from broadcasting in the West, the money somehow found its way to other channels and people. So when that revelation hit in public news, these influencers then said that they're the victims. They didn't know. They didn't really bother to check either, but they didn't know. So they're perfectly innocent, but they certainly like to have that money and that planning security. Because if people out there, if they've never run a media company, it's super tough. And it's, you never have any safety, you never have any guarantee what's next month gonna be like, let alone what's the next year going to be like. You can literally lose, and that's happened to entertainment influencers on the web all the time. You know, if you're a gaming streamer or whatever, you can lose almost your entire audience in a couple of days if there's some scandal or people don't think you're cool anymore. You lose the sponsors, your viewership drops, and then even if you just plateau or you have a certain decline, things are not going up, you may lose your sponsors because they think you're not going to benefit their brand anymore. And very quickly, the whole construct can come crashing down. And especially with the today's internet world, a lot of these influencers, they're completely dependent on staff. They can't research themselves. They cannot write themselves. They need people to do that for them. They can hook up
Yeah.
their equipment. They can produce. They can distribute. Oftentimes they can't edit anything. So nobody, of course, most people, they can't do everything. You don't have to be able to do everything. But a lot of these influencers, they can almost do nothing by themselves. They can talk into a microphone. They can talk into a camera, but that's about it. And so
And
if you
they
lose,
haven't really, a lot of them really haven't done the background reading or research to really
exactly,
understand what they're talking about.
exactly. But if
Yeah.
they lose their editor,
That's
if they lose the full-time editor, if they lose the technical guys, if they lose the writers, the producers, and the directors,
Then they don't look so slick, do they?
no, that's it for them.
No.
They can't do the work, even if they have a certain amount of audience. We saw many YouTubers quitting in the last couple of years. I mean, popular guys doing this topic and the other topic, not political topics, but still, they had a sizable audience, but they just couldn't handle the workload anymore because either you pay all these people for a specific task and then you're barely left with any money, or you try to do it yourself, but you're killing yourself trying to do that. So that's very scary. And the
Yeah.
Russians know that, and the Chinese know that. That's why they're offering these contracts that are dream contracts on the
Mhm.
surface for these
Yeah.
influencers.
I mean, you do wonder where the money comes from for some of these people to put out their product. And then you look at it, and so much of it is suspect. Um, and my belief has always been you do the work up front, you do the study, you do some writing, you write something that has real thought in it, and not just what everybody else is doing, and then people will come, then the value will appear. The only problem is it often takes, if you are thinking a new thought or putting things together in a way that other people aren't, it does take a while for people to come to you
Yeah.
and say, wait a minute, there's some value in this. This guy's saying something interesting, and maybe if we look at this, we ourselves will see new things. And that was one of the interesting things. I should talk about my speech in Milwaukee, and the thing that struck me is when they had a dinner there a week ago last night, and there was a somewhat famous right wing Sovietologist. I'm not going to mention his name, but we ended up getting, one of my readers was there, and he sparked a question about Ukraine, knowing that in this room you had a split of opinion.
Yeah.
And Trevor Loudon was there. A lot of famous people were there on the right, trying to oppose Russia and China. Well, not necessarily Russia, because when Ukraine came up, I ended up getting into a debate about Ukraine and the Ukraine war. And he was just absolutely, he didn't use the word shut up, but he kept saying stop, stop to me when I would talk,
Hmm.
uh, trying to say that we had no business supporting Ukraine, that Ukraine, someone else there said, well, Ukraine and Russia are both evil. There was a kind of a moral confusion, I thought, about the Ukraine war, but there was also fear. I could see that Russia would act against the United States, because Putin now was threatening, if we authorized the use of these longer range missiles to Ukraine, that we were providing that we would provide, that Russia would directly strike North America. And there were people there that were had wished they were there because they wanted to get into the debate. But it is a problem on the right. Well, then when I went to Toronto and I met General Van Herk and his deputy, and General Clancy, the former head of operations for NORAD, they talked about how the real danger to North America is Russia. That Russia has these capabilities, these hypersonic missiles,
this
these longer
problem
range
isn't
cruise
going
missiles.
away. So even if we
No,
abandon,
it's very strong. He said
Ukraine, it's not going away.
it's not going away. Well, it's interesting. I should, in terms of, and I was interested in Van Herk's view of China and how it's coming along strategically. And he said China's building nuclear weapons very quickly. They're developing their strategic capacity. But he said right now China's not a threat to North America with its strategic weapons. But in 6 to 8 years, the Chinese will have the same capability to devastate North America that Russia has now. And he said basically, and General Clancy gave a speech on Wednesday, General Scott Clancy. He had something he called Scott's report card. And he said NORAD, that's North American Air Defense Command, he gives them an F for being able to protect North America and a D- for early warning. And of course, as General Van Herk explained, and General Clancy said, I'm probably going to get in trouble for this. Clancy is a Canadian general. Van Herk is a 4-star American general and former commander of NORTHCOM as well. They both said the problem is the awareness in Ottawa and Washington. They don't understand how much of a financial commitment is needed to have an effective North American air defense. And he said that they need their, General Van Herk said at one point, we have a lot of educating to do of the public and the politicians. And my thought in the back of my head is that I was in education, and it's a much deeper problem because these politicians think they're educated already. They're part of this leftist education system that's created them. And the political system they're swimming in. And I had conversations with 2 politicians related to this. One was a politician in the Wisconsin state legislature talking about Robin Vos, who's the Republican boss of the lower house of the Republican legislature in Wisconsin. And he said that Robin Vos is a creature of China. And Robin Vos had threatened to put him in jail if he didn't get on board with it. And he said, I can't vote for abortion, right, an abortion bill. And so the kind of Republicans, this is the problem we have. We have bad Republicans. Not just Democrats are in bed with Russia and or China. Republicans are also in bed. And then at dinner, I sat next to a former Canadian MP, member of parliament, and she had lost her last election. She had been in for 6 years. She had started as a liberal. She had become a conservative. And her father had been a major general in the Canadian Air Force, who knew what the score was with Russia and China. She understood this. And she talked about Trudeau being, and others there also affirmed this, that Trudeau and his family are like this with the Chinese. They're just with China. And they're not really defending Canada's interests. And she talked about how they took her seat away. They brought Chinese. Now in Canada, they don't have computer counting of the ballots, apparently. She talked about how they count by hand. They brought Chinese nationals in to count the vote, and they shrunk the number of polling stations from like 30 to 9 so that they could have these people counting her vote. And she said, they have poll watchers, but she didn't have enough. And they're doing these things where they make piles and stuff. And it's like, are they really watching? She wanted an investigation because, she had won. They tried to get her so many times. The second 2 times she ran, they weren't able to get her. She wanted to have an investigation. They wouldn't even call her to testify before the Canadian Parliament about what had happened to her and how she had been targeted. But she said, Canada is under occupation from China. And what I learned was that China, had Canada had like 33 million population, 8, 10 years ago. Now it's almost 39 million people, and it's massive immigration from China and from India. A lot of Sikhs who are sympathetic to China, and it's
Great.
like they're just pumping Canada full of these people. And she said, "You don't need an army to be occupied," was a comment she made. And you have to
Mm-hmm.
warn the people in the United States they have got control of Canada, your enemy, China. Wow, that was, and I, hear the same thing in Wisconsin from a politician and very sincere man who'd gone through just an awful time being in politics. He wanted to get out, but he felt obligated. And this lady too, "I'm a fighter," she said, and she'd been in the Canadian military. I think there are fighters out there, thank goodness, but they're not getting the support from the public. And now they sound more like me than I did 10 years ago. They're
Yeah.
saying the same things
There's
I
there's
warned about
something.
10, 20 years ago. And now it's urgent, and now we're at the end of our tether. This is what
Yeah.
I'm hearing, you
There,
know.
there was a comment recently under one of my videos. I don't remember if it was my show or if it was our show. I think it was in regards to this whole Tenet situation, and this person said something along the lines of, "Well, looking at the broadcasts of Tim Pool and this Ruben guy and the others, it doesn't seem so bad, does it? I mean, they were talking fairly normal things from a conservative perspective." So this person asked what the big deal was, with this Tenet scandal. Why was that? He was asking, was the content of those broadcasts, was that really a threat to our democracy?
Yeah,
And I
some people in Milwaukee were giving the same line. We're saying the same as that. Yeah,
And I
believe it or
answered
not.
the following. I said, well, directly, immediately, no. But if you allow foreign influence like that, especially covert, this covert foreign influence like that, in a situation like this where we're close to World War III, and if that happens a lot of the time, there will be more bias, there will be more of this and more of that, and eventually you're going to have a massive danger, even though the individual broadcast may seem mostly harmless. There was a mention of somebody was asked it's one of these Tenet people, or the people attached to Tenet, they were asked, could you repost a specific story? And it was speculation that it was this thing by Tucker Carlson where he went shopping in a Russian grocery store, and he was commenting on how great it was, what a great store that was. And so, yeah, could you please repost that? And that person answered, I don't really like this. It's too on the nose. I don't like it. But then there was more pressure, or more pressuring from Tenet. We really want you to cover this and repost this thing. And finally, that influencer relented and said, okay, fine, I'm going to repost it. So this is like, if you mess up your relationship with Tenet, then you may get scaled down with the money. And so over time, you can create massive damage, and you change the way people think, but
You change the
automatically.
narrative. Look,
But
they've
there's
done that on the left
but
already.
there's a
You
positive
know.
version. There's a positive version of this, right? As you just explained,
Mhm.
when there's people that stand out, and there's people that recognize, okay, this is different, this stands out, let me support this. If more people support this can actually create some significant change, even though it may take time. But if there's a slow rising curve, at some point the rise may become fairly large and quick, because people are actually quicker than they're giving credit for. And I explained this to somebody else recently. I said, well, because somebody complained to me that people around him, they believe Russian propaganda, and how can this be? How can they be so stupid? And I said, well, how complicated is it for these people to be or how can they get exposed to good stuff? Because if you watch regular stuff, it's dull, it's boring, it's often misguided. It's even infiltrated and influenced. But then if you look outside of mainstream media, most of what you can find is Russian propaganda repackaged. So you can't really fault people, in an unconstructive way. If they fall for this stuff, you have to try to find solutions for this. Don't just trash people. You have to figure out who they are and what their intentions are. And you have to be engaged. And at some point, when people get exposed to quality, they will recommend the quality to somebody else. And once you recognize quality, it's like riding a bike. You cannot unlearn it. Once it clicks, once you got it, you don't lose it. It's like riding a bike. And
Yeah. Well, at one, there's also the little boy that said the king was naked, in the Hans Christian Andersen story about the king's new clothes. The king has clothes that nobody can see, who is vulgar. Vulgar people can't see these clothes, but people who understand quality and have intelligence, they can see the clothes. So they got the king out there naked, thinking he's wearing these new clothes that show how sophisticated he is. And a little boy in the crowd shouts, "The king is naked." The little boy. And so I felt at some points of being like the little boy shouting, "The king is naked," because when I was on the security panel at 2 p.m. on Wednesday, the lady that sat next to me, very nice lady, was Trudeau's former ambassador to Canada. Ambassador to Russia. Sorry, she was the Canadian ambassador to Russia. Very nice lady, but she said, this is what she said, and I'm sitting right next to her. You can imagine trying not to make a face. She's saying that the biggest threat to the Arctic is climate change, and that since 10 to 20% of Russia's economy is in the Arctic, they want a stable Arctic. They don't want conflict up there because they don't want their economy disrupted. And that, there's a little bit of a security problem with Russia because of Ukraine, hinting that we need to get over this Ukraine war thing. So she sounded very much like Tucker Carlson, except she believed in climate change. And she was obviously from the left. And
yeah.
I found it fascinating at the reception afterwards, a Canadian lady who's from Ukraine. She is a Ukrainian from Kharkiv. She came up to me and she liked what I had said. In fact, I had talked about psychopaths running Russia, in which the former ambassador had tried to grab the microphone, but the moderator didn't see it. And
I hope you didn't drink any tea over there.
I know. I just escaped being scolded by the former Canadian ambassador to Russia. I thought, oh my gosh, I got away.
You're feeling fine right now? You're feeling fine? You're good?
Yeah.
Okay.
I felt the tickle in my throat from getting a cold from being on the airplane in Milwaukee, breathing everybody's viral contaminants. But no, I feel okay. I drank coffee. Mostly I didn't drink any tea. And I kind of watched my cup. So I didn't, but there were, this was held at the Albany Club, which is a conservative club. There's lots of conservatives around. We toasted the king and the president of the United States. I was only one of two Americans there. But General Van Herk really stole the show because he was this 4-star general who was saying, look, the politicians we're not defended and we need to get serious about this. But this Ukrainian lady, her reaction to this ambassador who had said climate change is the number one threat to the Arctic in Canada and the United States, she said, she's too smart. She's an ambassador. She can't possibly believe that.
Wrong. Yeah.
Is what she said. And it really made me think because I naturally take people, I'm an American. I tend to take people at their word, but she was right. It's such nonsense. And, my statement afterwards was to quote the defector, Colonel Stanislav Lunev, saying that the leaders in Russia, aren't normal people. They're crazy persons. And you can't think that they're not a threat because they are psychopaths. And of course, the generals were smiling. I looked out, they were sitting at their tables. They were watching that segment. And I had met them the night before, some of them at dinner, and they were smiling. So I thought, well, good, they're They're
Yeah.
enjoying it. But you can imagine the frustration if you're a military commander. And this is
Hmm.
what you have to contend with a politician, which is what an ambassador is basically, saying that, oh, there's no missile threat from Russia. It's climate change is the threat. We don't need missiles. We need to get rid of oil refineries, right? Well, who is that serving? Who is that really serving? So, we have to stand up to these lies and these self-destructive narratives that have gained political dominance. I mean, politicians do not have the guts now to stand up to global warming and climate change nonsense and to say this is nonsense. You got to just say it, people. Just say it's nonsense and stand up to it. There is no scientific evidence that man-made processes are going to cause the planet to boil away. That is a scare tactic to destroy our energy sector here in the West. And who profits? Russia, because then they'll be supplying us with the energy.
Yeah.
Because Russia, China,
And
and their
yeah,
allies, Iran, they don't
and
care about the
there were
environment.
there was some activity from the U.S. Democrats, and this was in line with some of these very famous climate scientists. I think it was Michael Mann, and they drew this comparison. They said we're going to fight climate change pretty much. It's going to be such a serious battle. We compare it, they said, to World War II, right? So we need a general mobilization. We need to, just put everything aside and focus on that thing and wage that global or worldwide war. Now, in that analogy, what is then CO2? What is then who are the emitters of CO2? In this analogy, they would be the Nazis, right? They would be the fascists, and you're supposed to just destroy them, right?
It's China,
And so
India.
yeah, so that's kind of an interesting narrative, I thought, when I heard it for the first time, because it's a call for violence, really. I mean, if you think about it, if you're saying, well, you couldn't really make deals with the Nazis, you couldn't live with the Nazis, you couldn't let the Nazis do what they did. They were going to take everything over and destroy everything good. So that's how that went. And so then they make this analogy to climate change and changing everybody's lives. And if you're not on board, you're with the Nazis, I guess, symbolically speaking. And so this is kind of where this extremism comes from. And in between, this show and our last show, there was another assassination attempt against Donald Trump at a golf course. And when you looked at the guy who is now arrested, he was broke. He was fairly broke. I think he was around 60 years old. And so he didn't have much to lose in a traditional sense. And apparently he didn't have anything saved up for retirement. So he was looking at a very bad, bleak future for himself. He was either forced to work till he drops dead. And what if he gets cancer? What if he gets some other physical problems? So he had no retirement money, apparently. I don't think he had health insurance at all, or maybe terrible health insurance. So maybe that was his thinking. If he's going to go out anyway, he might as well go out with a big bang and, fulfill a certain ideological goal so he gets a ton of fans and his name will be in the history books, right? I mean, this is what I meant earlier when I said, well, why is this piece of propaganda so damaging? Why is that piece of propaganda so damaging? I can't see the danger. Well, it adds up and it changes the way people think.
Yeah, that and this is a lead in on the second assassination attempt on Donald Trump. You have this propaganda that Trump is like Hitler, he's going to destroy America. And of course, it's kind of odd because Trump's policies would be economically good for America. He would destroy America. But they've created these narratives that about racism and the environment that make Trump seem like a threat, an existential threat. And they say that. I mean, the vice president who's running for president now, Kamala Harris, says that Trump is a threat to the republic. I mean, those are fighting words. Those are words of civil war. when you say that. So, of course, Trump is going to have to say that back. And of course, all the people in Beijing and Moscow get all excited because could there be a civil war in America? Could we get them to shoot each other? Well, now
Yeah.
we do in a sense have the shooting has begun, and it's targeting on Mr. Trump. Well, who else? Who among us who would prefer Trump to Harris are now targets? That anybody who votes for, we're not going to give you the job. We're going to maybe freeze your bank account. You don't deserve freedom of speech anymore. And that was interesting. I met one of Tommy Robinson's friends in Milwaukee, a guy named Peter McElvana, and he gave a fabulous speech on freedom of speech, saying they don't have freedom of speech in the UK anymore,
Oh yeah.
and that they're arresting people right and left in the UK. And he said, "You think you have the First Amendment, but you only need 5 Supreme Court judges who agree with the Democrats, and your First Amendment can be canceled."
Sure.
Right? And it's a very scary point. And I was interested in picking his brain about what's going on in the UK. He's from Northern Ireland. He's a Northern Irish UK person, and he told me Tommy Robinson is the way he's depicted in the press is not how he really is. He's a really good guy, and the kind of propaganda against people who in the country. He said there's lots of patriotic citizens who aren't white in the UK. It's not about that, right? But it's about this left. And Keir Starmer is really, if he's not an extreme socialist, he's a communist, right? This is and of course it's. I asked him. I said, "Are we at the edge of an abyss?" And he agreed. He thought that Western Europe, you're in Germany, I'm in the U.S. I talk to these Canadians. We're on the edge of an abyss. I mean, if a 4-star general, former commander of Northcom and NORAD is saying we can't defend North America, and Putin's threatening North America directly because he's not getting his way in Ukraine, what have we done? How can Biden claim that he's standing up to Russia and he
Yeah.
won't bolster America's defenses? He's
Yeah, and
purposely
isn't
leaving
it
America
smart?
defenseless.
Isn't it kind of the devious smart way? The devious smart way to do this. You have certain, I mean, from the Russians, coming from the Russians and the Chinese, so they have certain assets here. Then they have some somewhat assets here, and then they have some dupes over here. And they can all coordinate this, right? So they got this one guy in the West who's gonna just damage security a little bit more, or just just prolong things a little bit more and stall a little bit more. And then they got somebody else who's also stalling a little bit more. And then there's other guys who say, well, security is bad, so maybe we should give in to the Russians just a little bit more. And so you can point at every one of these guys and argue, well, it's not that bad what he did. I don't see how this guy is ruining everything. But it's the sheer volume of it. And if they have, I mean, they've got to have some big screen somewhere, right? So a very big fancy screen somewhere in Russia at the intelligence headquarters. And they got the system that they're using basically on the screen, and they have a real-time update of how is this going, how is that going, just to get it right. Okay, so not overdo it with this asset, not overdo it with that asset, but stay under the radar, stay below a certain line. And then if you have enough assets, you can actually destroy America piece by piece. So it's kind of like, yeah, it's like how you would attack something else. It's like the military would do it. You don't have necessarily all your forces in one spot, especially you don't attack at the spot where, the enemy is pretty strong. You're trying to find this soft spot. You find another soft spot. And then you figure out how you can weaken the enemy some other ways, especially like blowing up ammo dumps, with drones and stuff, and then you can make progress. It's not this one thing. It's so many moving bits and pieces that are part of this. And so with this,
Well, one businessman at the meeting in Toronto, at one point he expressed a certain frustration. He said, "Well, that's all." That he had been talking to General Scott Clancy, saying that, "Well, this is only one dimension of the threat. This missiles and the other thing. You do know that they're closing in on us here domestically. They're getting control of our institutions." And of course, the problem is the generals can't address that because they're under civilian authority. Their mission is just to protect us. But in the meantime, these politicians that the generals are under are actually actively undermining the defense, by not giving them what they need, by allowing all our factories to go to China. One interesting thing, at dinner Tuesday night, General Van Herk made a really great point. He said they got rid of shop classes in the United States. He mentioned this, and I'd heard this, that when I was a kid, they had wood shop, metal shop, electric shop, an auto shop class, and in junior high and high school they had this, and this is for guys that would then go into the trades. When they got rid of that, the number of skilled workers available, the difficulty, and then sending the jobs overseas to China mostly, meant that we now don't have a pool of workers who are skilled that can do these things. And this is what there was a Canadian admiral there talking about, the problem of rebuilding the Canadian Navy. They don't have
yeah,
the industry, they don't have the skilled workers, and they have to get that. They have to build that infrastructure. And the same goes for the US. The same problems exist here. I've heard Americans talking about it. So, and the politicians with their policies, see, have created these problems with their trade policies, which of course Trump wants to correct, with their lackadaisical attitude towards defense and their desire to pour all money into these social welfare programs and to open the border and to give priority. I mean, they're giving free hotel rooms and free food and free all kinds of things and free medical care to these people who are illegally crossing the border. People who are breaking the
yeah.
law to get here are getting rewarded, and veterans and people here aren't getting their operations, aren't getting their medicines, aren't getting their support because it's going to illegal aliens. This is just happening. And I've heard the stories. And why? Why are our politicians against their own people? Because they're for the big world. We're going to be wonderful. We're going to hug everybody. But wait a minute. That if America's not secure,
Mm.
if our money is all wasted on these weird adventures, China and Russia are going to become ascendant, and there won't be an America for anyone to go to.
Yeah.
We'll just be taken over by China, like Canada is.
So, yeah, so there is no magic button, no easy magic button to push to solve all these security problems. So you can't just abandon Ukraine and then everything will be hunky dory and we can build this nice world. And these politicians, they can have the fancy watch and they can have the cars and the driver and the status and have the cool cocktail party. Because I think that's what drives a lot of these people. I think that they've worked or schemed so long and so hard, and they had to walk over and step over other people to get to that point, and they just don't want to lose that status, and they don't want to lose that money, and they don't want to lose well, for example,
Well, they think there's an easy way out, and this is the problem. There is no easy way out. There's no easy way out at all. And this was the thing that General Van Herk, going to Ukraine for a second, he said something in his speech on Wednesday night, which I think was analytically correct. He said there's no good resolution to the Ukraine conflict because the Russians aren't going to give up, and the Russians will attack North America as Putin is threatening before they will give up in Ukraine.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I think he's right. That's been my sense of it. That doesn't mean that and of course, General Van Herk said, look, it's a disaster if Ukraine falls. He said that it's a disaster if Ukraine falls, and it's a disaster if North America is attacked directly. So it's as if we have a choice between two disasters. And of course, I think, of course, as long as we can keep Ukraine from falling, we're avoiding the disaster of as long as we can keep it from falling without being attacked, we're keeping our head above water. But the question is, how long can we maintain that balance? And it does, in my view, it buys us time to try to defeat the problems that we have domestically. But there's no, this is not easy. We're not going to, as a society, as the West, we're not going to be able to get out of this without some kind of sacrifice
Yeah.
of one kind or another.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, sometimes people actually still read books about past conflicts, World War II, World War One, or they watch a movie because there's been lots of movies about these things recently in cinema. They're watching Dunkirk, I think by Christopher Nolan, who's really weird politically, and such, and it scares people, right? Because they think that, well, it's so bad and this can be so horrible and there's so much sacrifice involved. We need to avoid this, right? But it's like that when there's no easy way out, you have to mentally be aware that this could go bad.
This is
Anyways,
history, and in
yeah,
history, you can't avoid these things. This is what history is made out of.
yeah, and so and
There's
still,
no avoiding it.
if you face it now, and you make the right decisions, it may still be really tough and really crazy. But it just take it on now and just deal with it now. Don't put it off. It's like when the doctor says, well, you may have cancer and we might, there needs to be something done now, and you don't do anything. You could run into serious, if you do nothing, you could run into serious problems. And so over the last couple of days, we saw these drone attacks on multiple huge ammo dumps of the Russians. And it's hard to quantify how much Russian ammo is destroyed. Some people say it could be, billions of worth of ammo, or maybe tens of billions. Some people say it's tens of thousands.
I think the Russian stockpile is their total howitzers ammo stockpile is about 1 billion. I think that's what it
and
is.
the rockets. I mean the Ukrainian head of intelligence recently said publicly he's really worried about the ammunition coming from North Korea, ammunition which has already reached Russia and was being stored, and that came out in the press pretty much at the same time these drone attacks were happening, and we saw some spectacular footage. And it's now several of these ammo dumps, which sends a really, really strong signal. And it's also, I mean, for the Russians, it's kind of the same thing. How far do they want to push this? Because ultimately, it's their choice. If it's totally going to escalate.
Because they're already look there. You saw the Speaker of the Russian House say that there's going to be. He's saying this. There's going to be a nuclear world war. I mean, he's actually saying this now. This is the Speaker of the Duma saying that there's going to be a world war. I don't think that they're bluffing. General Van Herk said something interesting that's worth thinking about. In his speech, he said, the Russians don't have this tit for tat thing where we do one thing and then they respond immediately. They give their warning, but it's more like a cup that is slowly filling up. And as it fills up, and then it reaches the top, it overflows, and that's when they act, right? So that's what we've got going. And I think I would amend that by saying that the Russians and Chinese, I believe, have been plotting to destroy the United States for decades. I think that's one of their objectives. They want to rule the world, and the United States is in the way. And so destroying the United States is always something they would do if they could set up the right circumstances to do it. And that they are trying to fashion out of the current circumstances a rationale if they have the wherewithal, if they have the troops and the equipment to actually carry it out. And what was disturbing was I asked General Van Herk if China and Russia together could take down the U.S. and he seemed very worried about
Mm.
that. He hoped that that was not the case.
Yeah, and it's like
But from the defectors,
when
I think
this
it is the case.
when this situation shifts, when it's a different outlook for the Russians and the Chinese, they may actually start to back off. And if their economies are starting to go down, then things may change. Because as I explained at the beginning of the show, when you visit the south of France and you look at these super properties once owned by Russian oligarchs, I mean, you can have all that money, or well, supposedly own all that money, but you can still get taken out. And they've killed a bunch of Russian officials over the last 2 years. So you're always, there's so many people who are really aggressive with these guys. They're really devious, really terrible people, but they want to just be rich and just enjoy their lives, right? And so the moment these people step out of line, they get taken out. But how much longer can the Russians do this? How much longer can they function in that current constellation if when everybody can see some of the incompetence, and some of these people can see that victory would not be guaranteed for the Russians. So it's not exactly what the leadership is hoping for it to be. So this is why you got to keep up the pressure, especially when it comes to information, especially when it comes to talking about their bigger plans and their bigger structures. Now, here there was a story
Well,
fairly.
well, I should note there is the money factor to get people to sell out their country, but there's also ideology. People really do believe this nonsense, or they copy it, or I have that Ukrainian lady who said she can't really believe that climate change is the number one threat. I think they do talk themselves into things, but there's another point, and it's Judge Bork slouching toward Gomorrah. I had it when I was putting away my books. I picked it up and I thought, that was an interesting book back in the 90s. And he has this passage here that he talks about our elites. And he said, some of our elites, professors, journalists, makers of motion pictures and television entertainment, delight in nihilism and destruction as much as do the random killers in our cities. Their weapons are just different. But who, familiar with the academic world, to take a single instance, has not seen destructive ideas spread by men and women, not because they mean well, but because they want notoriety, influence, power, or just because they enjoy laying waste the structures built by others? There is no particular reason to think that people with PhDs are more well intentioned than people who dropped out of high school.
Yeah.
And I think that's brilliant, because we are dealing with a kind of psychopathic, malevolent nature in human beings that have become experts, who have become office holders, who've become professors and media people. And there is an extent to which they are smart enough to know that what they're saying is nonsense, and they don't care. They want the notoriety, the influence, the fame, and they also, many of them, enjoy the destruction that can be wreaked by advancing this stuff. It's just like someone said that Lenin, he had an ant farm. It was like he had an ant farm, and turning it upside down and seeing what the ants did was a wonderful experiment. That, comparing Bolshevism in Russia, socialism in
Yeah.
Russia, as this experiment where Lenin turns the ant farm upside down to see what happens. I mean, that's part of this. Everybody isn't nice. It's just not true.
Exactly. Then, of course, very far-reaching story was the exploding pagers and exploding
Oh,
radios. And so, of course,
yes.
that touches upon a larger field of booby trapping and other embedded devices. And this is something that can be used by different players, and it certainly is used by different players around the world. And so people probably heard the basics of the story. So this was a front company that was created by Israeli intelligence, and they somehow managed to produce these walkie-talkies and produce these pagers, and those were ordered. Those were ordered by Hezbollah and were used by Hezbollah, and then a signal was sent out to these devices, intended to make the users grab the device, look at the device, and so that's when they exploded. And when that story hit the news, I got a bunch of questions by people asking, is it possible to detonate any smartphone? Is it possible to detonate any device, my laptop or anything by remote? Certainly not. No, this has to be specifically prepared. This has to be done professionally, either as a man-in-the-middle attack where you intercept a device and you change it, and then you reinsert it into that environment where you took it from, or you build the device. You intercept it, or at the earliest stages, and then you modify it, and then you send it to the person that's actually ordered it. And it made me think about all the booby trapping in the Cold War and all the gadgets and all the stuff that people associate with a James Bond movie. Now, in a James Bond movie, you press a button on your in your car, your Aston Martin, and then these machine guns pop out and all that nonsense. But certainly, there are ways to embed things. Now, recently, a very famous or infamous Russian blogger, a war blogger, he was killed by a device which was embedded in, I think it was an award that he was given. So this was, I think, at a cafe somewhere. He received that physical award, and then it was actually detonated. So this is certainly something that people should be aware of, that these techniques are actually used. And there's so many ways of booby trapping something, right? There are ways to embed things in infrastructure, right? I mean, there was a very good study, and I talk about this in one of my books, a very recent study from Germany, talking about the capabilities during the Cold War of the Soviet East Germany, right? So they had a sophisticated team of about 3,500 men who were especially trained in booby trapping and embedding things and destroying things. They called those, I think, neuralgic spots where your destruction has the biggest effect. And this special unit, it was half commando unit and was half a standard intelligence unit. They were even equipped with the tiniest nuclear devices. Especially tiny, so tiny that you may actually get to smuggle them somewhere. You may actually get to embed this miniature micro nuke somewhere, and then it just waits for a signal to detonate. Now, this can also be done electronically with viruses and other things, or even explosives at specific points, because apparently the Russians know all about our weak spots. And there's public companies and there's private companies, and they do risk assessments, and that data is not adequately protected. So if the Russians steal that data, they know exactly where to hit. That substation, that water station, that power line, this, that, and the other. So who knows how much stuff is already embedded in our infrastructure. This could be any sort of place, and it's just waiting for the signal, and then something actually blows up and destroys something that is hard to replace, because there's some bits and pieces that are custom made in very small numbers, certain circuit boards, a certain piece of gear. And if that goes, who knows when it can be replaced. So this made me think
the Israelis, I understand that in this attack that they killed, close to 1,000 people. They badly wounded thousands of others. that I've seen some pretty grisly pictures.
Oh yeah.
They were circulating when I was in Canada because that's when the attack happened. We were getting the information, and they I don't know exactly what they did, but it looks like they injected some kind of explosive near the batteries of
Or
cell
maybe into the
phones,
battery. Yeah.
yeah, and other things, and this goes into all kinds of devices. And of course, people have those cell phones on their person, they have the cell phone in their pocket, they have it up against their head. There was a picture I saw of a guy who the top side of upper side of his head was blown completely off and his brains had come down into his lap. This kind of thing. Um, just the amount of destruction done to the terrorist networks from this is incredible. And of course, um, this is, and I don't know, this is quite savage, right? Because we all have these devices and we're all vulnerable. So, what did the Chinese and Russians do? What did they do next? Who's going to use this next? You know,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I
I
mean,
don't know who does this next.
some people maybe remember the stuff from the James Bond movies. You know, the exploding pen where you just press the button in a specific, you press that button in a specific combination, and then it's armed and it's about to explode. Or there's explosives hidden in shoes. There's explosive hidden in everything. And certainly in the Cold War, there were many episodes that people can read up on that are really interesting. When it comes to espionage, things embedded in furniture, things embedded in all kinds of devices, right? So there's or the classic, of course, an explosive device under the car seat or under the driver's seat in a car, and it's linked to your ignition, and when you start the car, the device explodes. There's so many things that can be done, and it's like, yeah, I mean, if somebody crosses a certain line, somebody else may actually cross another line, and this is why we actually need a lot of security when it comes to products and trade. How can we trade? How can we trust Chinese components that are being used everywhere? Because
Yeah,
there may be some
yeah,
deeply
exactly.
embedded booby trap in these components, in these devices, and sometimes it doesn't sound spectacular if you talk about some hidden code on a microchip board hidden in your device, or it's part of your device, and when there's a secret command that reaches the device, it will send too much electricity into components in that device, so it's then broken. It cannot be revived. It's damaged. Doesn't sound spectacular, but when it's very important devices that people use, then it's another matter.
Yeah,
If emergency services don't work anymore, if the phone lines are down, if the internet is down, if there's if society doesn't function anymore, this can be done by booby trapping, different forms of booby trapping. And I heard some stories. I heard some stories from some people that talk about telecommunications equipment, like the big equipment with the cell towers and the hubs, the big hubs, stuff that's being sold from one country to another country because they say, well, we offer cheap prices and we can build you this infrastructure. It's sometimes there was talk about actual explosive booby trapping, not just to hurt people next to it, but to just destroy the equipment when there's a secret signal being sent out to these devices. So you send out the signal, and in some other country, telecommunications go down. So you send out equipment that is booby trapped, and there was no explicit explanation really when it came to these pagers and walkie-talkies, because some experts commented on this and they gave some baseline information about high order explosives, how little explosives you need to actually harm somebody when there's shrapnel and everything. But it was still kind of a mystery. Was it embedded in the batteries themselves? Was it surrounding the batteries? Was it there was some different descriptions there, and it's like,
Yeah, we don't. No, I didn't see a consistent thing on that, so I don't know. But when you go back, this is just a philosophic statement. Political science was founded by Plato and Aristotle, and part of it was about finding out, what is the proper order, political order, societal order for man? What is the way we should behave? What is the meaning of life? What is right and wrong? What is justice? And all these questions. And of course, one question would be: is this the right way to fight a war? Obviously, the terrorists have started it by doing dirty things, by attacking civilians and raping and killing and bombing. And it's so we're in a very bad place because making life more decent, living well, and having a proper regard for human life has sort of gone out the window with this, hasn't it?
yeah, yeah. It's like
It's
it's
scary. I
there's
mean, I understand why they did it. I understand what they're up against, and it's like people are cheering the Israelis on for doing this. But my gosh, now do the bad guys think of? Did we give them an idea?
well, well. I mean, there's also chemical booby trapping, and there's also biological booby trapping. I mean, imagine if you plan some device or somebody plans a device somewhere, and it looks really hidden. It's kind of in the ventilation system of a major airport or a major train station, and it can be accessed by remote. You send out a signal, it reaches the special embedded device, and then it releases a biological agent, such as smallpox, for example. Um, this is,
You know what? It makes me yearn for the days when men wore armor and carried swords and
yeah,
spears, and they fought face to face in hand to hand combat, as opposed to this nonsense. You know, where there used to be something called honor, and now there is no honor anywhere.
yeah.
People just kill
It's
people. They ambush people. They just murder them in the most devious ways. You know.
yeah, but of course, there's always kind of there's always the very very slippery slope pragmatism involved when. Well, of course, the Israelis are going to say there are potentially four fronts of a war prepared four fronts of a war prepared against Israel, from coming
Yeah,
from all these different sides, and so
they're fighting for their survival. Yes, absolutely. This
yeah,
is this is what it comes down to. I suspect that we will reach some bottom. We'll hit bottom, sort of like a drunk, and it'll be such horrible slaughter that people will recoil, and hopefully there'll be some new renaissance of decency and honor. I'm just, of course, you know, I'm not an optimist, but that is a fantasy,
hmm.
probably. But we can always hope for a better standard, and that does require both sides, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, I mean, it's different. Different Muslim groups, they're in the same weird spot where they're getting offered help. The Muslims are getting offered help by the Russians and the Chinese, but ultimately the Russians and the Chinese, they want to get rid of the Muslims because they don't need them. They don't want them. They're just there and they're a
Well,
problem for
here's
them.
the thing: the Muslims are coveted allies. The Russians and Chinese are murdering the Muslims that will not work for them
Yeah.
or align with them, and they are husbanding the Muslims that will become red Muslims and will help them. And the thing is that what the Muslim world needs to understand is that China and Russia have weapons of mass destruction, chemical and biological, especially, and they can. It doesn't matter if you have a billion Muslims or a billion point however many Muslims. They will, when there's no America trying to uphold a higher standard, they will murder you all. That's just the way they think in Beijing and Moscow. They will murder you all
Yeah, I mean, of course,
if they find it convenient.
the
Yeah.
Israelis need to be aware, certainly, and also these Muslim groups, they need to be aware that somebody else could be pulling the strings of this possible future serious conflict in the region, right? Because when it comes to when it comes to the Russians, I mean, they got this crazy idea about, Russia being the third Rome, and they want to have access to the Mediterranean, and they really own it and all the historical sites, and it's really, Russia who should have that. And so why wouldn't they think about, being so psychopathic and being so psychopathic in Moscow and St. Petersburg? They could be thinking, they may be thinking, let's get rid of the Israelis, let's get rid of the Muslims by spreading some smallpox and spreading some other things and making them take the blame for it, and make them escalate it further, so they're just gone.
They will, by the way, blame the people they destroy with these methods for supposedly using those methods on them. That's what they will do. And that is a standard Russian practice. That's why it's so alarming when the Russians accuse the U.S. of doing things that they're doing or they intend to do, like start a nuclear war. It's very funny when Russia accuses NATO of plotting this coup in Ukraine and this war to break up Russia, when it's Russia's the one that's arming. If North America doesn't have decent defenses, according to General Van Herk, well, how is America getting ready for a war against Russia? How's America planning aggressive war on Russia? America's not even getting ready for such a war. We have all these obsolete nuclear weapons and missiles. Russia has new stuff. Who's the one that's planning the war? It's Russia. It's China. They're the ones that have new things and that are building nuclear weapons and missiles like sausages. They're the ones aggressing and invading countries, right? And people say, American aggression in Iraq, you should talk. Iraq was invading all of its neighbors. Iraq was a problem. We invaded Iraq to get rid of Saddam Hussein because he was a satellite of Russia, and he was threatening the Middle East oil supply. And the same thing for our problems with Iran. We don't want to invade. Americans don't sit around thinking, what country can we invade in next? We're going to get rich. We got broke invading, going into Afghanistan and Iraq. It broke us. We don't want to spend, what is it, $3 trillion or $4 trillion? Why do we want to spend this money? We don't really want it. It's American imperialism. It's a joke. American imperialism, we get bled dry. Where's the imperialism?
Yeah.
I don't understand.
Yeah. And also, when it comes to these, booby trapping and, covert operations and all that, and the propaganda, all these activities, they are dependent on methods of communication. So we saw this with the pagers, and people were asking, why would these groups use pagers? Because they can't be tracked, because they just receive a signal. And that could be any specific signal that's coded, so they immediately know what it means, and then they take the appropriate action. Or the signal sent to the pagers could just mean to go to a certain meeting place to have a proper meeting and exchange information, right? A prearranged meeting point. So you don't want to have a cell phone necessarily that can be tracked. You don't want to necessarily have a transceiver, a two-way radio that can be tracked once you send out a signal, can be triangulated. So sometimes you want to use a pager. And then, of course, when it comes to these what they call walkie-talkies, that could mean anything. That could mean different types of radio bandwidths and technologies. Some are fairly short in distance, maybe just a handful of kilometers or miles. And sometimes people want this short distance radio signal because then it cannot be picked up by somebody who's further away. So this is kind of like the day-to-day operations. You need to have a flow of information, but you also have to secure that information. And so then there was another major story that concerned communication, and it's about the Tor network. Now, this is basically the backbone of what's called the deep web or the dark web. So this is a highly encrypted part of the internet, and you need to access it with a special browser, and the information that you exchange with a server, that's not flowing in the usual ways, the usual data highway, so to say. But instead, the information is zigzagging from different kinds of specific servers, and supposedly the information is anonymized between and re-anonymized between these different servers. So from the perspective of the people running Tor or programming Tor and people using Tor, they expect it to provide absolute security, absolute encryption. And of course, it's advertised as a tool for dissidents in bad countries, but it's of course also a tool for criminals and Russian agents and some other agents. So now there was a major story coming out of Germany, actually, but this is affecting the entire Tor system that is used also by cyber criminals and whatnot. So this was an investigation. This was an investigation against some underage porn platforms hidden in this dark web or deep web, and they were trying to find an administrator. They wanted to find out who that person was. And so normally, this was considered to be impossible to track people down using Tor, but they were using an approach that was really clever. So they could actually narrow down the number of suspects. And then it was just a matter of closing in on the suspects, and they actually found it. Now, according to the absolute, nerd experts on this thing, this is something that can only be used in rare circumstances. So it's such an amount of work, and it involves so many different elements, it will only be used in special cases. Well, it's interesting to know, but this is happening almost at the same time when we had the whole scandal about this Pavel Durov guy and his Telegram platform, which is used for hideous propaganda, but it also has an encrypted chat component. So a lot of very shady actors and cyber criminals and cyber warfare people from especially the Russian side, a lot of them were using Telegram. A lot of them were using Tor to spread propaganda, reach people, and also have secure communications. Now, every time there's a case like this, the same debate starts all over again. What about your right to privacy? How can you jingle the privacy and security? So, from your perspective, with all your experience, how to do it correctly and what is realistic given the very real security problems? Because a lot of people that overemphasize privacy, they know very little about security, or they just repeat propaganda saying that the safety is not a problem. It's just your
I will tell
privacy
you
matters
what
everything.
intelligence professionals tell me, and there is no privacy or security on the internet.
Yeah.
There is none.
Yeah.
There's none. There's no such thing as something that's secure. And when an intelligence person wants to communicate with me, it's snail mail.
Yeah, it's classic. It's old
When they
school.
want to send me something that's important, yeah.
Yeah, it's tradecraft. It's like the real way. The real deal.
Yeah, yeah. I should say we have to end now. It's been almost 2 hours. So I want to thank you, Alex. I want to thank our listeners for joining us on Friends and Enemies. I'm Jeff Nyquist. My co-host has been Alex Benesch. We've been trying to update everybody on the last 2 weeks in the news and what's happened with the conferences I went to. So thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week at the same time.